Welcome, everyone. My name is Radha Ruparal, and excited to welcome you to another People First Talk. I see some familiar faces and some new ones. So just to reground ourselves about why we're here. So the People First community is a coalition of actors across sectors and from around the world with a belief that if we want to invest in sustainable development, we need to invest in people, and particularly we need to invest in collective leadership. So that is leadership that's locally rooted, that brings many diverse people together from across the system to work on some of the biggest systemic challenges we face. And so over the last few months, we've been having this series of talks with members of our community to really explore these two questions. What does this mean? What does this kind of collective leadership mean? And then how do we develop it? So we've heard from many different players. We've heard from the African Leadership Academy and Acumen Fund, Dream a Dream, Peer Driven Change. And what's been powerful about these conversations is while we have some similar ideas around the type of leadership we need, we all have different approaches for how do we develop it. So today we get to hear another different approach from another member of our community, the Global Health Corps. So let me introduce our two special guests for today. Today we have with us Heather Anderson. So Heather is the CEO of Global Health Corps, where she's been for the last 10 years. And before stepping into the CEO role 3 years ago, she headed their programmatic work, so brings a wealth of experience. And she also has a mix of public and private sector experience and is based in New York City. And alongside Heather, we have Isabel Kumwembe. Isabel was a Global Health Fellow in 2013, and she is based in Malawi. So we'll get to hear directly about her experience. She also is a Global Health Corps staff member and an active alum, and now she works in leadership development. And she currently works with the African Leadership Group, who we had a chance to hear from earlier in one of our previous talks, as the Malawi Activation Manager. So great to have you both with us. So how this is going to work today is we're just going to get into a dialogue. We're going to keep it quite organic. We'll get to hear from both Heather and Isabel about the reflections on the leadership we need and how do we develop it. And what I'll encourage you to do, we have a small enough group, so as you have questions, just put them into the chat, and that way we can organically bring them into the conversation, and we'll also create some space at the end for more questions. So with that, let us dive into it. So Heather, let me start with you. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about Global Health Corps, what you're up to, and why investing in leadership matters in the field of global health?
Great. Thanks, Radha. Hi, everyone. Great to be here with all of you and with Isabel. I am Heather Anderson, the CEO of Global Health Corps. So to answer Radha's first question, GHC's 6 co-founders, who were all in their 20s when Global Health Corps were founded, started the organization in 2009 with really this big vision. What would it take? What could it look like to have a new generation of leaders all committed to health equity, working together to collectively transform global health? What would it take? How could they do it? Because back then, in 2009, which admittedly sometimes feels like ages and ages ago, there were, declining HIV/AIDS rate. Fewer women were dying in pregnancy and childbirth. And yet there were still so many people who were still dying unnecessarily, completely preventable diseases, and that, tried and true public health interventions were not getting us to where we wanted to be. Something needed to change. And so GHC was founded on the belief that everyone can have a role to play in solving complex health issues, and that by investing in people early in their careers and building a tight-knit network, to do so, they could really have the power to move the needle in global health challenges. So I joined in 2012, so a couple of years into its founding. Barbara Bush, one of the co-founders, was our CEO. And I came in to help build and scale the program. Back then, we were a team of 8 globally. We were working out of donated office space, but it was really a passionate and committed group. A lot of people often ask, like, why I joined Global Health Corps. I had been working in the global health space for a decade, and I have to say, I not only was impressed and inspired by this, sort of like small crew but passionate group of people working in Global Health Corps, but I myself started my career in the private sector. I don't come from a health background. And, and I have been able to see throughout my global health career how my skills and experiences really have helped contribute to the work that we're doing, and really became convinced that investing in diverse leadership could be really a key to the transformative changes and really moving the needle in global health that we needed. And especially seeing too that there were not that many on-ramps to global health if you were not a medical doctor or a clinician or a nurse. So this really sort of inspired me to join. And so since then, over the past 13 years, we have been working to build this diverse pipeline of global health leaders. We have a network now of more than 1,200 young people that have gone through our program. The entry point to Global Health Corps is a 13-month program. It is a cohort-based model focused on early career leaders, and we really prioritize experiential learning by recruiting and placing emerging leaders into frontline health organizations in East and Southern Africa and the US. We offer very intensive wraparound leadership programming, and it's really through this formative year that they've come into really sort of across the health sector, within the health system. They build this network, and then throughout their career, as they then leave the fellowship, they enter into our alumni community, which continues to be a space where we're fostering this tight-knit group of leaders, providing continuing leadership and management support and skills and trainings for them. And now sort of our network is global. It's across 40 countries. The majority hail from East and Southern Africa, but folks do end up sort of going to all different places. And, we continue to see major demand for our talented young leaders from the health organizations that we're working at, and for the young people wanting to have this opportunity to be able to get into the health space. And so maybe briefly, and then I really want Isabel to share her experiences of what it was like as a fellow. A couple key points just to highlight in terms of what I think is unique to GHC. One is that, similar to, as I mentioned, to my background, we really do focus on bringing in the non-clinical talent, and this was really a demand from the health organizations, our partners, whether it was ministries of health or small grassroots organizations. When we asked them, what do they have a hard time recruiting? They talked about the need for supply chain experts or technology or communications or fundraising or monitoring and evaluation. And so we found and have really built the ability to bring folks from all different backgrounds and experiences into health with these kinds of skills and experiences. I think also specifically the fact that we are demographic specific for sort of the 21 to 30-year-old age group, really getting people early in their career. So many leadership opportunities are more for senior leaders. And so this is really an opportunity to bring folks in early in their career. And then I think lastly, really thinking about sort of the continuous holistic support. We always say, like, once a fellow, always a fellow, and that it is something that it's sort of throughout your career that you are then part of this tight-knit network, being supported and really being able to make a change, not only individually through your own work, but collectively through the network and others. So I will wrap it there. But Isabel, I'd really love to turn it over to you and share in terms of, like, why did you come to Global Health Corps and what was your fellowship like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, everybody. Good to be on this call. So my leadership story with GHC started in a non-conventional way. So before I thought about getting into leadership development, I really wanted to do one of the more traditional professions. You know, everybody had told me, you know, you'd make a really good lawyer or a doctor, you know, and my dad was an economist. So I was like, okay, my path is pretty straightforward. I'm going to be one of these things. And I also grew up around institutions like the church and family. And so I grew up in a home where we always wanted to do good for others. So I decided on, you know, I decided I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to study human rights and kind of help people in that way. However, when I went to college, I never made it into law school. I missed it by just a percentage, but I was studying what my father was studying at the time, economics and sociology. However, as time went by, you know, I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my career. And one thing I really became passionate about was community service and community mobilization, you know, towards good causes. And so while in school, you know, I started mobilizing young people to help to develop the infrastructure of the university. And I got into communications and partnership building and community building. And through this work in my final year, I heard about this organization called Global Health Corps. And the way it was presented to me as a young, you know, student about to graduate is, you know, there's this fellowship program, you work, but you also go through a leadership program. And so I was so excited because I was especially excited about the work part because, you know, I hadn't figured out exactly what I wanted to do. So I was like, okay, I'd love to do that. It's communications. The organization that I saw at the time was ArtGlow, where I ended up applying the Art and Global Health Center. And you know, I got in. And after I got in, I was told that as I am working as a communications fellow, I am going to be going through this intensive 13-month leadership development program. And I was so excited. It sounded really different from the traditional experiences we have in Malawi. And also the level I was coming in was quite a high level. You know, most people, you know, around the world don't get an opportunity to just jump into a role like the ones GHC offers. So GHC does such a great job in giving young people a chance. And so I got into a role. I had no experience, but I was super excited and enthusiastic. I was given a co-fellow. I was given mentorship, and we started like meeting with our global community of fellows. And I was very honest about how I'm learning everything for the first time. And the community was so supportive, like sharing resources, helping me to navigate. And at the same time, I was introduced to topics of health equity, social justice, you know, and different types of leadership. And my mind really opened up, and I realized how important and transformative it was for me to get an opportunity to do a program like this. I became such a fan after I did it. As Heather mentioned, I joined as a staff member in Malawi. And as Brittany said, I love to share the opportunity with people, with young people, because of how transformative it was to me. So, you know, having an opportunity to have somebody walk side by side with you as you're growing as a professional is so rare. And so when young people ask, do you have to be a health professional to do this? I always tell them no. Like, I love analogies, and like Heather described, we're a system. Just like the body needs different organs, you know, your different skill set can contribute to the health equity, you know, the health equity battle. So yeah, that is how I got in to GHC. That's my story.
Wonderful. Thanks, Isabel. And thanks, Heather, for painting a picture of the fellowship. And I think, Isabel, you just bring it to life, why we need to invest in young people. And thank you for helping us get a sense of the experience. So Heather, you talked about this experience. So it's an experiential journey, and then there's wraparound leadership development support. So tell us a little bit around what's the type of leadership? What are some of the traits and characteristics that you're trying to develop through this program? And then Isabel, we'd love to hear your firsthand experience of some of those and how those landed with you through your fellowship experience.
Great. So, so first of all, I have to say, it feels refreshing that, you know, there's more conversation and dialogue on the traits and skills we at Global Health Corps have long considered critical to good leadership, such as humility, vulnerability, empathy. I can't tell you, in the 10 years I've been at Global Health Corps, especially in the early years, I would be at meetings where we would talk about what is the future of leadership and health, and people would just constantly be saying, we need more epidemiologists. Like, this is what we need. We need people who just can, manage budgets and manage the work plans. And yes, those things are absolutely critical and important as well. And yet, I would talk about some of these other sides of leadership, but really to like sort of blank faces. Like, people really at the time did not want to engage in this kind of conversation about what does that look like? How does it show up? Why is it important? And so, I am feeling more hopeful that there is sort of more understanding and recognition. And so sort of specifically, I can share just sort of three of, sort of the aspects of leadership that have been really important at Global Health Corps. I'd say first is really around cultivating authenticity, whether it's from the first day of the fellowship through their lifelong involvement in the alumni community. What is it to be cultivating your self-awareness, to be building trust with each other, to clarifying your purpose and your values? How do you get more comfortable navigating conflict and challenges for each other, feel comfortable seeking support from one another, and then being okay to ask for help? I think we saw this really come out in the pandemic when, I think it's safe to say all of our job descriptions were thrown out the window, and we were all trying to figure out how to navigate the work and our lives. And that, many of our alumni who were overseeing health projects, dealing with staffing changes, dealing with budgets, didn't have PPE for their staff. Like, they were active on WhatsApp or getting on Zoom call. One of our alums referred to the Global Health Corps community as their like brain trust, to really be able to show up and know that this was a space that they could like ask for help, figure out how do you navigate these challenges in really what were unprecedented times. And I think being that authentic leader and having this trust of the community was a critical part of it. I think it also, though, speaks to another part of it, or another sort of aspect of what is it to have really this collaborative networked approach, and that the focus goes beyond individual leadership to the collective from, again, sort of day one at GHC. As Isabel shared, and maybe we can get a little bit more insight in terms of what Global Health Corps' co-fellow model looks like, where you're paired with someone else from the very beginning of your fellowship that you are working with day in, day out, someone who's across lines of difference. Sort of how is that formative in terms of your growth and learning? I think too, even in terms of sort of the network collaborative approach, so again, thinking about the pandemic, our fellows and alumni who are working in their communities in East and South Africa, Southern Africa, or here in the US, they were the ones that were seeing how the health systems were buckling. They were the ones that were seeing like, yes, okay, some PPP is being distributed here, or yes, though there's not women able to get to health center to be able to deliver babies. And so for Global Health Corps as an organization with the network, we're able to provide some resources, some technical support so alums could really self-organize and say, like, we really want to be doing, sort of like a mental health effort here in this area. We really want to thinking that there needs to be some de-stigma around what is it to wear a mask or wash hands, and really sort of have the alumni drive what they were seeing in their countries needed to be done. And that really speaks to this collaborative networked approach, that it is not just like hub and spoke, but it's really folks in their countries, in their communities, knowing how to solve issues and how do you lean on others and engage with others to do that. And I think to say too, for us, it's been really amazing to see through our survey data that 80% of GHC alums report every year that they are actively collaborating with another Global Health Corps alum. So really sort of speaks to this collaborative nature that we think is so critical in leadership. And then lastly, that again is sort of like connected, but still slightly different, is around systems leadership and really sort of systems thinking. We intentionally at Global Health Corps placed fellows at all different parts of the health system because we think it's important that when they come together through our sort of intentional programming throughout the fellowship year and beyond, that you're in conversation with someone who's worked at the Ministry of Health compared to someone who's working at a grassroots organization, someone who's an expert in technology versus someone who's an expert in communications, because we think that richness and diversity of experiences and background is what it's going to take to figure out how to solve these complex challenges in health. So I'll leave it at that for now, but maybe Isabel, whether it's the co-fellow model or any other sort of leadership traits that I talked about, I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts and reflections.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. Just to say, like, these traits Heather is talking about, often described as soft traits, are really important. And GHC really changed my mindset about these traits because, you know, even as a staff member, one of the things I always loved doing was interviewing for our fellows. The interview period, it was so nice because we did it in a very unique way that I've not seen done in many places, such that we check if fellows, you know, stand for our values, the values Heather was talking about: self-awareness, humility, collaboration, innovation, you know, inspiration, all these kind of soft skills that people should have. And for me personally, going through the fellowship really changed my mindset, because in Malawi, like in most other places, the workplace, the academic space is very competitive. And I was really focused on just being the best, being number one, doing the best. You know, that was my mindset coming in, and I'm sure it is with many people around the world. But joining this fellowship program, I realized there's so much power in collaboration, and you really don't have to compete. Actually, you can go further if you're working with people to achieve a major goal. And so that was like one of my favorite things, just learning about collaboration, learning about how you can be humble in a situation where you don't know anything and you can learn. I learned a lot about authentic leadership, ethical leadership. Ethical leadership was one trait that really stood out to me. I remember one specific instance when I was at home with my co-fellow. I'm going to talk about the co-fellow model just a bit, but we lived together, we worked together, we were together all the time. And she was from America, I was from Malawi. And one of the things coming into the fellowship, I realized that, you know, there was a day I got my results from university, and I got them a bit earlier than everybody because my dad knew the head of the university. And I was kind of bragging to her, like, I know my results already, you know. And she told me, but is that fair? You know, is that honest? Is that ethical? And I'm like, oh, wow, why is she being such a pain? But as I went through, like, when I went through the fellowship, I'm like, that was so unethical. What was going on there? And I didn't understand that before I joined the fellowship. But coming out of the fellowship, I started to realize these things. And so I really was like, wow, these skills are so important to have, specifically in the Malawi context. Heather's talking about systems. One of the big challenges we have in Malawi is corruption. And because we're not really training our young leaders in these skills, a lot of people my age think it's okay to be corrupt. I have so many young people working in different organizations here who tell me how they've made an extra $1,000 from cheating the system, and it's okay. But, you know, when you go through a program like this, you realize, no, that's not okay. It affects the whole system. So that is really some of the traits that Heather was alluding to. So with the co-fellow model, it was really an amazing experience because you're kind of forced into getting along with people. It's very culture diverse. It's very, you know, you get to operate with somebody else from another world, and you have to work together. You have to make it work. Like I said, I like analogies. So it's kind of like a marriage where you're placed together and you have to make it work for the 13 months you're together. And so with my co-fellow, you know, coming from different countries, different value systems, different backgrounds, we started off with a lot of clashes. We had some differences that we didn't realize until we lived together, and we had to just make it work. And GHC does such a good job because they support you with a program manager in your country to help you to navigate these differences. We had a program called Still Harbor then, which also helped us to navigate issues of, personal life and anything that is affecting your professional life, which helped us to walk through. During our workshops and retreats, we also had built-in time, intentional time to sit with your co-fellow and to navigate any issues that you guys have. So, it was uncomfortable for me at first I'm more comfortable now with doing these things as I'm older. But when I was younger, I didn't understand why they were making us so uncomfortable getting to know somebody. Kind of felt like we just had to make it work. And I'm grateful for it, because now my co-fellow and I are really close friends. We work together, and we operate around the world. She helps me with ideas, from the US perspective. I equally help her with ideas from my Malawian perspective. And, it's really like that with the whole cohort around the world, the idea of, being locally rooted, but still globally, relevant. So it's been an amazing experience just having that co-fellow model, and then taking that out to the wider community, where you have people in the same city, in the same country, and then around the world. So really, really a transformative experience.
Isabel, thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting, some of the themes that we're seeing across these talks, right? This idea that being locally rooted and you bringing your Malawi experience, but then having exposure to global spaces allows you to think about things in different ways, or issues in different ways. And I think what's also interesting about this co-fellow model is, again, across these talks, we've been hearing about this idea about how do we work across lines of difference. And in some of the other talks, when we'd heard from Jacqueline Novogratz at Acumen, they talked about, well, we do readings, we bring a theoretical perspective. We look at Martin Luther King readings and talk about values. But what I like here is it's a different way. So it's, putting two people who are quite different together. And from the get-go, you have this explicit focus on learning across difference. And then you have these quarterly reflective spaces and a coach who can support you to working through difference. So I think it's just powerful to see, even as we're trying to develop this type of leadership, there might be different approaches to develop it. So yeah, thank you for bringing light to that. So we've already started to get into this question of, well, how do you develop this leadership, right? We talked about a diverse cohort. We talk about reflective spaces, some of these capabilities. What else, Heather? Yeah, what else? Share a little bit more around some of the lessons you've learned around how do you develop this type of leadership? And then we'll get to some of the questions that are coming up in the chat as well.
Sure. So one thing I think that we haven't touched on yet is also sort of our focus and belief on the importance of inspiring and mobilizing others, and that leadership is not about a title or a function, and that as we say at GHC, it's not enough to just really sort of work hard and try to succeed in your role, but you need to be able to talk about what drives you, what motivates you, what changes do you want to see in the world, so that you can bring others into that. And so, at GHC, we really work to support people in those moments, whether it's through a one-on-one conversation or in a big event or a conference, so they can have the skills and ability to inspire and mobilize others. And for some, this feels super comfortable to do, and others, this is part of the hardest part of our leadership curricula. But what we do is really sort of engage throughout the year about having workshops and trainings about helping fellows connect and discover and practice sharing their own stories, sort of what brought them to this work. What is it about them? What is it about all of us together in terms of the change that they want to be seeing and what needs to be done now? And so really sort of having spaces for practicing that. And then, not only through the fellowship, but then beyond, really supporting our alumni to have opportunities to speak in the public forum, whether it is conferences or panels or it's writing. We often refer to it as on pages and stages. And so we've had the opportunity for alums to speak at the Skoll World Forum or the International Conference on Family Planning, or even having Isabel have this opportunity to be joining here today. We just think that it is a powerful way to inspire and to engage and to bring others into it, and that we see that there's a huge ripple effect that happens when you're bringing this diversity of voices and perspectives to the table to be able to share their own stories. Isabel, do you want to share any of your thoughts in terms of, what your experience has been like building your own voice?
Yeah, absolutely. So being a GHC fellow, Heather and John, they used to make me do the public narrative session a lot. I used to be like called to the front, and I did it maybe 4 times, 5 times. But just to give some background context on this, one of the key aspects of our programming is storytelling, and using your voice to as a call of action, and being confident in doing that. So, like the statistics show, like so many of us felt more comfortable at the end of our fellowship using our voices to our different passions and towards our different advocacy work. Specifically for me, looking at the inspire and mobilize value, storytelling has really impacted me in that sense, especially because a lot of my work is around mobilizing communities towards different causes. And one of the things that I'm passionate about is really finding opportunities for young people, connecting them to jobs, connecting them to opportunities that will get them out of the poverty cycle. And so with Global Health Corps, one of the things I had to do was to recruit young people. And for me, this was something I used my public narrative skill a lot on, telling a story that is inspiring enough to get people to join the health equity movement, the social justice movement. It really was a way for me to just get people on board and continue to do so. Even with my work at Africa Leadership Group, we're trying to get 3 million young African leaders in jobs by 2035. And this requires people to have a confidence in you, to trust you, to join the movement. And so you have to tell the story correctly. And so I've been able to use, the training and skills I have to build that trust with my community. But I've also been able to just speak at different events. Rotary, I'm a Rotarian, and I've gotten to speak at really huge platforms. And it was very easy for me to communicate my call to action because of the framework I went to. I've spoken at Fred Swaneka's events, at ALUSB. So opportunities keep coming, and it just helps you to be more confident in those opportunities. And you can see it with the fellows too. So many of our fellows are just really inspiring. We get so many opportunities for our fellows in Malawi to speak, and they have a confidence that is different from the average person. So yeah, I'll totally agree with what Heather said.
I love that, Isabel. And it sounds like there's a couple of elements. One is just the building the confidence that your voice matters. And then it was the skills and the training around it, which sounds like you've done some public narrative work. I know using the Marshall Gantz model, but then also the opportunity to continue practicing that. So that's interesting. And I think something we've heard from a couple of the other talks as well. Let me just ask one other question that when we were prepping for this conversation, you'd mentioned one other thing about your model that I thought was interesting. And then I'm going to open up the floor for questions somewhere in the chat. So if you have any other questions, please raise your hand or put it in there. But one other thing that you talked about in terms of building this collective approach was that as a fellow group, you did things collectively, like you had these stretch projects where you worked collectively. Can you just share a little bit more about that? Heather, maybe just share the philosophy around that. And then Isabel, I'd love to just hear what your experience with that was.
Sure. So it's been an integral part of our fellowship since almost the beginning, this opportunity at the country level for all the fellows in that cohort to work on a project together. So it can really be sort of up to them, whether they want to do something at World AIDS Day, or they want to do something in a specific community, but really sort of this opportunity to have them they have a budget and navigate what do we want to do and how do we do it and who takes the leadership roles and what is that. So really to kind of practice what a lot of the leadership skills that they are learning throughout the year. So Isabel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you guys did or any other experiences, especially as a staff person.
Yeah, for sure. So what Heather is saying is so true, but I'm going to also tell you the on-ground experience was intense. People would get mad at each other. People would cry. People would have to make it work. And it's a big group of people in your country trying to figure out how to use this allocated amount of money to make an impact. I think it was just such a great leadership opportunity for all of us, and to understand our different leadership strengths and weaknesses, to see who the loud ones are, who the quiet ones are, who the budgeters are, who are the creative ones. You got to see all sorts of sides of people. And at the end of the day, GHC helped us to navigate that. Sometimes the program managers would intervene when it was getting too heated. Sometimes, some people would need some pushing to get things done. But at the end of the day, I think it was just the experiential learning that GHC really values, just making us do hard things like, come up with an exciting project to impact your community. With my cohort, I remember in 2013, we went to one of the hardest to reach destinations. It's called Neno. It's a very far away district. One of our partners, one of our longtime partners, Partners in Health, works there, and we just love Partners in Health. They provide a preferential option to the poorest of the poor and the hardest to reach. So we thought it'd be really great for us to go somewhere where we wouldn't typically go, somewhere out of our comfort zone, and go and help, go and encourage the young people. We did a career talk at a school and encourage the community to take interest in their health, and talk about different health issues that, in Malawi, traditionally, people don't talk about, like sexual reproductive health, like small things like that, which will make a big difference to young people. And so we went there, and it was just an amazing opportunity. We were so happy after, figuring this out and brainstorming the whole year. And throughout, even as a staff member, just watching the fellows come up with theirs, we've had health clinics, cervical cancer, breast cancer screenings, all sorts of amazing ideas, even just environmental campaigns like tree growing and all that kind of projects. So it's been really amazing to see. I'm sure if Brittany was to show us a whole list of projects, it would be amazing for everybody to see. But that's some of the stuff we did.
Thank you, Isabel. I think what I'm taking away from this is the core of the leadership development is experiential, right? It's being in these settings and actually doing the work. But what I hear around that is also just the wraparound. So there are program managers and others to help you make meaning of that experience, to pause and reflect as you're going through that. That's been really powerful. That's what I'm hearing from Isabel. Well, let's actually open it up now to the group. I think there's some great questions in the chat. Wendy, maybe I'll just get you to come off mute and just voice your first question. And then that second question around measurements, one that I know everybody always is curious about, so we can go into that as well. And others, feel free to put your questions in the chat.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's just always so helpful to hear how other organizations are doing such similar work. I mean, you've already spoken to some of this, but I'm just curious how you think about, like, when you're talking to someone externally and you're really trying to get them to understand the impact of GHC, what is the kind of relative weight? And I'm sure there's a continuum answer, but I'm just curious how you think about it. Like, is it that you're recruiting just a completely different pool of folks, and as you say, a more diverse group than would typically go into this? Is it how you're selecting them? Is it that the experience itself is so transformative for folks, like, the individual experience, meaning, is it the wraparound kind of training and support? Is it the ongoing, like, I don't know. How do you think about the relative value of all that in terms of what actually generates the lasting impact?
I mean, I feel like the short answer to all of that is like, yes, of, sort of all those different parts to it. I feel you could probably also appreciate, Wendy, it kind of like depending on who I'm talking to or who we are talking to in terms of what they're most interested in learning about. Because I don't think it is as like clean as like, it's this percentage of this and like this percentage of this. Well, what I do think sort of are the core elements is that I tend to, in conversation, we would talk about sort of, yes, recruiting and the leadership program and that sort of thing, but I think it's also like, and what happens? Like, what is the outcome of this? And we anchor it, with our big vision of health equity, stronger health systems, but we really look at it through 3 points of, how are alumni, excelling in their careers? So basically, like, what are they going on to do? We look at it as how are they collaborating? And so that really is speaking to sort of the 80% of alumni collaborating with each other year over year. And then the third point of influencing the field, of which, again, we have more than 70% of our alumni every year reporting that they're speaking on panels, they're working on advocacy, they're writing op-eds, and that for us, that really speaks to both the individual and collective impact that they're having, that they're rising through their careers, they're working together, and that they're using their voices to make change as sort of the cornerstones. And then we can get into the specifics of what is it to recruit folks in and have a cohort model and have people earlier in their career. Isabel, I don't know if you have specific thoughts about that too.
Yeah, I have to agree that it's all of those things, being able to track that and, just being able to see like from the first cohort of fellows, following them and seeing where they are today. That's something for me that personally shows me impact. I know with the Malawi cohort, I'm constantly asked to recommend some of our senior leaders, and just seeing how much their journey has been incredible, is one of the ways I can see and advocate for GHC in any space.
I'm going to just ask one follow-up question, because you mentioned the stat of 80% of alums stay connected, which is, and are collaborating with others, which is quite powerful. Can you just share with us, I know you're doing a lot of work with these fellows in their early years. Are you doing anything specific as they become alumni? Is there anything different that you do to support them? You also mentioned self-organizing. So yeah, how do you think about them developing their leadership, and anything additional that you do there?
Sure. So interestingly, probably when I first joined around 2012, 2013, the fellows would go through the fellowship program, and then they would be like, okay, that's great, but there is still so much work to do. Like, what's next? They were not satisfied to just go through the fellowship program. They're like, we have all these tight-knit networks of friends and colleagues. Like, we want to be working together. So like, like, what are we going to do? And so, really in the last 3, 4, 5 years, we have built out our alumni program. This is a big part of what Isabel had been involved with when she was on as staff. We actually had our community impact director, Hannah Taylor, on with us, was to really architect out what is that alumni program, what is that post-fellowship programming and engagement that we need, not only because the alums were really demanding it, but we knew that the real sort of return and impact of what this network could be was going to be many, many years beyond the fellowship. And so that's how we have now built out a structure of really informed by what our alums are asking for. What is it to continue building their own skill sets of leadership and management, but also what is it collectively to be supporting them as they continue to address the health challenges in their countries, in their regions, or globally. So we have everything from partnerships with McKinsey Academy and Africa Management Institute to Boardroom Africa, an advocacy accelerator. And we have alumni chapters. We have the Global Health Corps Mentorship Program, where alumni are paired with fellows to support them throughout their fellowship year. So it's an equally sort of rich programming that we've really built out, and I think has helped to not only continue to connect our alumni with each other, but that they themselves take a lot of it on themselves to continue to be connected with each other. I mean, I think, to hear Isabel say that she is still in close contact and collaborates with her co-fellow who's from 8 years ago. I think there's a lot of people that we've probably worked with 8 years ago that like we've never worked with since. And so to have that sort of formative experience and to be able to collaborate, particularly for someone that's not in the same city or working in the same kind of role as you, I think really sort of speaks to the testament of what is it to have been building this powerful community of leaders.
Yeah, and just to add to Heather, on the other side of things, why do we choose to stay in this community, right? Is really like what we're getting out of this community is really huge. I have so many close friends in the Malawi cohort. The other day I was traveling and I really needed to get my digital vaccination certificate, and I knew I could phone Kondwani Manga, who is an IT health electronics expert who works on vaccine coordination in the country. And he organized my certificate like in 2 hours. And we're so connected with one another on a friend level, on a professional level, that everybody wants to stay and continue to build this. We have so many professional opportunities that Heather has talked about. We're able to make recommendations and referrals, and also do just amazing advocacy work. We've had like a high rate of suicides in Malawi, and we all decided, let's have a campaign for mental health. We did that last year. And so it's just so nice to be in a community of like-minded individuals, because it's just so much easier to get everything done, really.
Yeah, thanks, Isabel, for just sharing that and bringing to light. And what I'm taking away is just, again, the power of the community as they come together to think about what are the issues that matter to us in this time. There's a few great questions in the chat, so I'm going to just keep them coming. One question that constantly comes up, and it's come up today, is just around measurement and seeing the shift. So yeah, maybe Heather, just over to you. How do you think about evaluating and measuring some of the shifts in skills, mindsets, and beliefs? So you talked about, building collective orientations or, building authenticity. How do you think about that? And yeah, what progress have you made and what questions do you still have on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. We currently have not done sort of like pre and post in terms of fellowship, specifically around mindsets. As we are launching our new US program, we're thinking about what does that look like? Because I think there's everything from like competencies, and do you want to measure it, to mindset shifts, and what does that look like? And I think as we hear from our alumni and we're like measuring, we're seeing that there's a lot that you can measure quantitatively, and then there's a lot that you really are going to get only through qualitative surveys. So, sort of even one of the points that Isabel mentioned before about confidence, sort of through the leadership training that she went through, that was sort of one of the biggest sort of qualitative measures that came out of our 10-year impact survey, is that like, yes, the quantitative measure was that we saw that Global Health Corps fellows compared to GHG finalists who didn't get the fellowship were more than twice as likely to stay in the field of global health and social development. But one of the biggest qualitative finding was the significant increase in confidence that especially females and our African nationals recommend or said in the survey results. And so I think part of the question and the work that we all doing in leadership is that I think it is what is it to measure it, and how do you look at it? And so I think it's been great as part of the People First approach that we have the M&E group that are continuing to think about and wrestle with it. Because I don't think it is necessarily just like a black and white answer, especially too, because it's not only just like how are, in my perspective, the mindsets of the community that you're engaged with, but a big part of our work when we talk about a ripple effect is like, how are they influencing others? Like, how are we really pushing through the ecosystem to be able to see more people say, oh, yes, we do need to have a diversity of leadership. Oh, yes, it's not just a top-down approach. So I think those are some of the bigger picture pieces around impact that, I'm excited for us to continue to grapple with and think about that, sort of are just a key part of this work that we're doing.
Yeah, I know it's fascinating even to hear some of those measures you had around influencing the field and, tracking the impact one person has on others, both through some of the individual spaces, but also the group ones. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anna, maybe I'll get you to come off mute and share your question.
Sure. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Isabel. And I just had a question for you, Heather. You said that you joined GHC to support on the scaling up and the growth of the program. And I wonder, what were the main challenges and also the key enablers, because this is not an easy task. So I was curious to hear more about that.
Sure. So definitely so many lessons learned over a decade. And because Global Health Corps' first class of fellows in 2009 was 22. And then we had, upwards of 140 fellows at one point. And now sort of our strategy of both having fellows and really this investment in alumni has sort of reshifted to it. So we have smaller fellowship classes, but then a greater investment in our alumni. So it's sort of, with this evolution, I'd say a few things in terms of scaling challenges. One is, I think, some of the classic startup of where you're just focused on scaling the program, but you need to make sure that the organization comes along with you. And so I'd say we were definitely in startup mode, working a lot of hours for a long time. But I'd like to think we've now sort of more corrected and balanced. So thinking about that scale both from what is it that you want to be doing programmatically, but also how is the organization scaling with you. I think also though, we're all sort of ambitious people at Global Health Corps in the sense of like, there's such appetite from so many young people who want to be GHC fellows or who want to contribute to be working in health equity and social justice. And so part of this too is like wanting to have more and more opportunities. And then on the other side, there's so many health organizations that also wanted fellows, and then continuing to see, sort of over the years that we'd have ministries of health that would say, we want like 10, 12, 14 fellows, like more and more and more. So sort of like scaling to try to meet that demand. But part of the challenge often that we would hit would really be sort of the financial threshold, and that, even though all of our partners, with the exception of the ministries, contribute to cost sharing in terms of what the fellowship costs are, when you're talking about 13 months of someone's livelihood and providing health insurance and housing and a stipend, it could be a limiting factor. And so I'd say that for us at times for scaling has also been a challenge in terms of how do we work to try to really generate the financial support that's really needed for the talent that wants to come working in these spaces and the organizations that have really recognized that sort of the unique value and skill set it is to have Global Health Corps fellows.
Thanks, Heather. That was helpful to hear. We've got a few more minutes. I'm going to maybe wrap up with a couple of final questions. So Isabel, to you, there's a great question in the chat. The curiosity, what's your biggest learning from your GHC experience? And then how is that influencing you today?
Nice. Thanks, Wendy, for your question. So I already talked about the soft skills and the mindset shift, but I'm going to talk a bit more about the job readiness and professional development side of things. So straight out of college, when I went to my first job, I remember sitting in the room and my mentor, she was my boss, but she's still a mentor of mine today, very close to me, Galia Bonet. She said something to me. She told me, okay, it's about two things. You're always on your cell phone when you're working. You're always texting on Facebook, and you're always sending your emails with all caps. So I'm going to have to put in extra time for you to just, improve your professional skills. And I was so uncomfortable, but, this is what she signed up for, to help me to be a young professional who is doing her work properly. And so she actually took it upon herself, along with the GHC programming. And one of the things GHC does is train our managers to be prepared for us as fellows. That's one thing we forgot to mention. And Galia Bonet is somebody who took this on hands-on. So she literally taught me everything about workplace etiquette, being on time for meetings, showing up, contributing in meetings. I used to like to keep quiet. I'm a quiet person, but she should encourage me to contribute and, just be creative and have a problem-solving mindset. And so this was like the theme throughout my fellowship program. And so as I went along in my career, I continued to try to practice these. And so now it's funny because I'm on the other side of the wheel where I'm doing this for hundreds of young people, where I see them coming late and showing up not very professionally, and I need to provide the same service to young people. So that for me has been the biggest takeaway and something I'm really happy I went through.
Thank you, Isabel. It's incredible when you've actually gone through something yourself, then you can actually create that ripple effect with others. And yeah, amazing to see you. And you don't seem shy and quiet here. So thank you for just being such a contribution today. I was going to ask Heather one last question. Let me just see. There's one more thing in the chat. Well, actually, we've only got a couple of minutes. So maybe, Heather, I'm just going to give you the final word and just anything else that you want to share. So we talked a lot about GHC and the Leadership Development Program, but maybe just a last chance for you to give your final word. Anything that we didn't cover today that you wanted to share about your own biggest reflections or learnings as you think about the leadership we need now?
Yes, I think, the last thing I would say is that I continue to feel that the leadership space is very fragmented, and that there's so many different initiatives. And so sort of with the PFA, the People First approach, and others, I do feel like that there's in greater awareness and like understanding, like almost like as a result of the pandemic, in terms of what kind of leadership do we need, just the people, the humanity component of it. I think that there is more real opportunity for people to understand what is it to invest in people. And so I'm excited and want to be hopeful that we can really continue to work to harness how we capture people's imaginations, people's understanding, that there's not ever going to be a silver bullet. These are real complex challenges, whether we're talking in Global Health Corps about the health work that we're doing, or whether we're talking about education or others, and that they intersect. And that, sort of, especially when you think about how young people are showing up in the world, that they just don't think about it as like one thing or another. Like they really think differently. They always give me inspiration. This is why I think I continue to do the work, is that it gives me hope for the future. And so I think the more of us who are actively working in this space can do our own inspiring and mobilizing of getting out there and talking, especially to those who are not hearing it or need to hear it more, or keep at it, because I'm seeing the cracks there of greater understanding. And I think it's just a matter of continuing to really harness the collective interest and collaboration. And it's not easy. I think none of us are in this work because it's an easy thing to focus on. I've worked in public health for the majority of my life, and this has definitely been the biggest challenge that I've worked on. And I think it can have the most impact. So it's why I continue to show up and do this work. And it's been really exciting to continue to find others who have a similar mindset and approach, and thinking about how this is going to happen and how we are going to make the change that we want to see. So I think those are my last thoughts. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Heather and Isabel, for being with us. And I think just from what you share, I think you embody a lot of the collective spirit that we're looking for in this community. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us and your wisdom. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions, but we'll have more space to continue these dialogues. And we'll be picking up our People First talks back again in January. So look out for more information from us in the coming weeks. And for those who, I see a few new faces in here. So if you're not a member of the community, please sign up to join. There's a link in the chat, peoplefirstdevelopment.org, and hope to see you all next year. Take care. Thanks again, Heather. Thanks again, Isabel.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye, Isabel. Bye, Rada.
Thanks, you all.